And now we're in the overtime.
Overtime.
I have always been surprised the more I dug into venture backed or venture focused startups, how many of them aren't actually innovations as much as reframings. In a lot of ways, that's, you listen to these really exciting venture theses and you're like, oh, I believe in this, and this. You're like, so basically that's just all the same stuff. You're just putting an app around this chunk of it. But there is a human element that I've always had massive respect for how you're able to do is gauging that limit of how much someone can accept, how far off their normal it can be, and this almost sort of fundamental limit of how much innovation they can take from one place.
Well, let's face it, even if we go back to people like, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, how much of what they did was truly, they weren't first to bring, half the stuff to market. They just did so with a better packaging, and they saw connections and applications for it that others failed to see, and then were able to tell the story around it. I mean, there were other MP3 players before the iPod. There were, other smartphones. I had a couple of them, and they were basically garbage. But to your point, though, that connection that people can make with technology is what can really change the game. And who would have thought, 10, 11 years ago, that we would be so reliant on these things? I mean, I remember saying it. I remember the first time I sent a text message, it was on my Motorola Razr flip phone, because that was also the first phone that I had that had a camera. And it was a crappy, 1 megapixel grainy little thing, but I just had my first child, and it was amazing to be able to take a picture on that device and then text it to, my parents. Not that they could read it because, or to a friend or whoever else. And I'm like, man, won't it be great when we're not carrying around a phone and a digital camera and the iPod and all this stuff? Because someday it will all come together in one. Now, I didn't think it would quite look or feel like this, but even this is transcending. I mean, with 5G speed, with so many opportunities, why will we even have or consider this my phone versus your phone? Because any place that we can have a screen interface that's connected to the internet, ideally with a camera, a microphone, and a speaker. If everything is in the cloud and we have enough speed and it's ubiquitous, I hand you this device and it recognizes, oh, I'm now being held by Chris. And, instead of what you see here, it's whatever Chris's phone looks like. Just kind of like the same with computers. We had dummy terminals connected to mainframes, and then we went to personal computers, now laptops, and now most of us have gone back to the cloud. So while we still may use a personal computer, we're not using that personal computer exclusively, because we could log into another computer and have that same desktop experience. So
ironically, yeah,
that's coming around to that point on innovation being cyclical. These are new approaches, but it's all been done before too.
Well, we've ironically gone back to the mainframe. It's just the mainframe's connection is no longer a physical connection, which is very interesting.
Exactly.
We now have these data centers in Iowa where if I can put someone on, two main pipes of two separate energy sources, and I can be able to buy some RECs on it, we become very popular.
Yeah.
In that vein, though, how do you, again, as I say, it seems like you've had a good judge in the corporate environment of how to understand how far you can push an org or push individuals in an organization to see something different. How did you develop that sense of it, or what do you attribute your ability to repeatedly be able to sense, man, this is too far for them, or this just, I might not be the right messenger now, I'll need a new messenger. I mean, what is that basis that gave you sort of that sense of that, or do you feel you don't have it? Because it seems like I can observe you do, but
I will say I received an incredible education working in politics for those 10 years. And even, when I was in college, I received just an amazing education while I was a student at the University of Iowa. It just didn't happen in the classroom. I used my time as a college student, traveling all over Iowa and the Midwest, working on campaigns. I ran my first campaign while I was, a junior and a senior in college. I literally put 50,000 miles a year on a series of, $300 cars my sophomore year, and then I did it again in my junior year. And so there's a few lessons that I learned early on in politics that have served me well, to this day. And one I actually just posted a little bit about today on LinkedIn around diplomacy. And, so much of getting things done gets to what I call Zen and the art of diplomacy, because there is an art to it, but there is also just kind of this recognition. And, and there's so much has been written on it, but a couple of my favorite sayings, one is, would you rather be right or would you rather be effective? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so oftentimes people just they back themselves into a corner. They get themselves into pissing matches with someone they shouldn't be getting a pissing match with, and they can't find a way out. The key I always found was you have to change the dynamics. You have to change the negotiation somehow, because, if you can, instead of it being all about you, make it the other person's idea and let them be the champions of it, I'd rather see things get done than see my name on it. In fact, I tell my innovation team all the time, there will be no successful proof of concepts or pilots that come out of our innovation team. None. Because it's a recognition that the successful ones come out of our business areas, because they're the ones that have to use the system, the tool, the technology, whatever it is. I've just seen too many times when, some IT or innovation group shows up to their business partner and says, look what I built for you. Isn't it awesome? You're welcome. No, really, you're welcome. And the typical response is, okay, thank you. I didn't ask for that, and so I'm not going to use it. I mean, how many software systems are deployed every year in corporate America and then never get used? I don't care if the business partner only does the first 1% in helping us identify a problem or an opportunity, and the last 1% signing the contract, and my team does the other 98%, they can have all the credit, because they're the ones that have to own it. And we're never going to get the ROI. We're never going to get the benefit if they don't have that sense of ownership from the very beginning. And so there is kind of this adage that one of my mentors taught me once upon a time. And I've also seen it listed as an Irish proverb. I have no idea of the actual origin, but the key to diplomacy is not just in telling someone to go to hell. It's telling someone to go to hell and getting them to want to make the trip. So my advice to all you young ones out there, spend some time working on a campaign. They're some of the most upwardly mobile industries that you can consider. You work day and night, you'll make the best of friends. You can wake up every morning feeling like you're going to go out and change the world. I decided I was going to do it while I was young and single. It turns out I was no longer young, but as soon as I stopped being single, I wanted to settle down and start a family, and that's when I got out of the business. But it has served me well many times in my corporate career as well.
Your first item of wanting to change the world on is really sort of that respect and collaboration, niceness, that ability to get past what it seems like in the political realm right now is a lot of what you're talking about is we've had individuals who have backed themselves into a corner past rational thought. How do we make those connections? One of those things, it sounds like you're identifying success as dependent on selflessness because you know that the value will be recognized by the people who are important. It doesn't seem like in our political environment right now that the long term, here's the important piece, this is the greater good that has a use, is winning out relevant to I won this battle, and it's a series of small battles. How do you see a way that we shift that dynamic? Or those young people who hop in those campaigns now, what can they do to shift that dynamic, get people out of that corner that it seems like we've built?
Well, and I think, and there's no easy answer to that, obviously. But I think the one thing that we can all do, and it starts with people on those campaigns and in those congressional offices, is to decide they're going to stop playing the freaking game. Because at some point in time, a lot of it became less about statesmanship, less about doing the right thing, and more about winning. And too often, there's different types and ways to win. I don't appreciate that most winning happens whenever you do more damage to your opponent than they do to you. And so I know young people get into campaigns, they get, starry-eyed. I was certainly there once upon a time. But we all have the opportunity to do what is right. And I think, a lot of us were reminded of this past week with the passing of, Representative Lewis. Talk about an individual who had the courage to stand up and call a spade and say, you know what, that's not right. For whatever reason, the interesting dynamic today is so many people seem conflict averse, except for the social platforms. And I'm not saying we need to turn them all off, although I did suggest that to my kids the other day. We watched that movie, Ready Player One, with the virtual reality world. And, of course, the good kids, they win and they take over the virtual world, but they had the foresight to shut it down 2 days a week because people needed to, live in the real world too. And sometimes I do wish maybe we would collectively agree that we're just going to shut off Facebook and Twitter and all that for a couple days a week and focus on the real. Because, when I was coming up, we didn't have those tools in politics. And so if I were going to get in a debate with someone, it was going to be eye to eye and face to face. And we had some really tough debates that I was a part of. But since we were in person, we did it with more of a amount of respect. And then we went out and had beer afterwards. That isn't happening as much because it all happens through virtual and through social media. And I don't know how we get back from that.
I do wonder if sometime in the future that separation that we believe between our real world and our digital world is going to shrink. I wonder in the same way that the note that was passed in class, everyone thought everyone read and everyone thought was important. I'm hopeful that the social media profiles become that way. It's like a drone pilot who lives in Reno, kills someone in Afghanistan before lunch, goes to Taco Bell, comes back and bombs someone in Pakistan. And there's just such a disconnection from the damage being caused that there's significant mental challenges in that realm of the military. You almost see that disconnection in the social media where I wonder if at least connecting something to a real person. Like now in Lynn Hicks's one, he identified that when the Register opened up comments and made people sign in with Facebook that, they were still just as big of jerks. I do wonder though, as the next generation of my kids start to see that, especially as through pandemic, there is a human on the other side. I know who the human is on the other side. There still will be that social consequence, so to speak. It isn't an imaginary person, which is sort of like where it feels like we are. I wonder if that'll help just through comfort with the technology.
Like anything else, there will be pros, there will be cons. There will be some good things that come out of this, and there will be some unfortunate things. And part of that is okay. That doesn't mean we have to accept it and roll over and just let it happen. That's the other big reminder. We all have an opportunity to influence, and I think it starts with how we conduct ourselves and leading by example for our children and for our peers and for our coworkers. And if we're able to do that, then we can actually go take things, I think, a pretty long way.
Within the realm of real connections to real people, I'm assuming when you plan out your month-by-month convertible bus trip or whatever, that what I've tended to find is if you're somewhere long enough, you realize that every place is the same. It's just dressed up a little differently once you find those connections. Where's the first 3 to 5 places you want to go and sit for a month or two?
Yeah. So a few of my favorite places. I love Washington, D.C. I've been there many times for work and also as a tourist. Yet I've never had any desire to live there. I've had many opportunities. I've had many job opportunities out there. But I've never wanted to live there, especially doing the political work, in part because of I've just seen too many people succumb to Potomac fever. To think because they are the second deputy to the undersecretary to the assistant to whatever, that they are God's gift to creation. That's not my style, but I still love DC. I love learning more and experiencing our history as a country, and DC is just to me a very special place. The newest addition to the list that I would not have said probably even 2 years ago is New York City. I will admit I wasn't a big fan of New York or of really a lot of the large cities. I'm an open plains kind of guy. I've been spending a lot more time in New York the last 2-3 years, the last 4 months notwithstanding. And I've really gone for a great appreciation for that city. And I haven't had time to explore all of it, and I don't know that anyone has. But also as an arts and cultural lover, there is also no place else just quite like it. I love New Orleans, and so that would be on my stop as well. Here again, not a place I ever want to live, but I love New Orleans. I love the French Quarter, the French Quarter and the Garden District, and some of that. It feels almost the most foreign place in the country. It feels almost very European down in the French Quarter. And you go for a few blocks and you're in downtown New Orleans, and it's just a completely different world that you can go down and experience. There's got to be a beach in there someplace. I'm not a huge beach person, but for 3 to 4 weeks, I could sit and read a few books and hear the waves rolling in. So my favorite beaches would probably be in Hawaii. I also love the Southwest. I love the mountains, and going down into the Moab, the Bryce Canyons, the part of the desert, all the way down into the Phoenix and Scottsdale area. I've taken many road trips down through there, and I think that's a pretty special place as well. There's actually very few places that I've gone that I wouldn't go back, but that doesn't mean that I want to put down roots and stay there. Iowa to me is home. There is no better place for the land and for the people. I feel very blessed to have grown up here, and this is where I look forward to spending the rest of my days as well. But here again, that doesn't mean I wouldn't mind a little less winter. So I have no problem being a snowbird someday.
When people look at our temperature, I've often joked that I want to move to Nova Scotia, and so as different political environments change, I keep looking at houses on Zillow because truly it's not Nova Scotia, but every time I look at Nova Scotia and realize that the bottom of Nova Scotia actually dips below the northern Iowa border, and the temperature actually ranges on average from 16 degrees Fahrenheit up to 77, because I always just assumed it was just like brutally, abusively cold.
Yeah.
And it's not. So I'm starting to think that New Glasgow up on Nova Scotia might actually be in the cards. I have a lot of convincing to do around here, but we might make it.
The way I look at it, I love all 4 seasons. Yes, I wouldn't mind having a little less of the winter season, but I also don't. I mean, first off, why would you live further north than Des Moines or Central Iowa? I mean, why would you invite more winter? I mean, I love the Twin Cities, love Northern Iowa. Why would you, consciously choose to have even 2 or 3 more weeks of winter, let alone, 4 more? But I also wouldn't want any more of this oppressive heat and humidity that we have been experiencing lately. So why would you live further south from here and have even more winter? Yes, you can have more summer. You'd have more summer, you'd have less winter. But I don't like that trade-off either. I don't need more heat or humidity. And I do want to have all 4 seasons. So to me, we're in the sweet spot, this belt right here.
Although I'm often surprised how far north we are when you look at the East Coast, and how far south we are on other hands. But Denver, I keep forgetting that Denver is south of us. Like that just always seems northwest. But I-80 runs, because I've driven back from San Francisco back to Des Moines and Detroit a few times. But we're actually pretty high up there. Like Salt Lake City, Wyoming are all within the catchment. I was talking to someone from DC the other day, and they were joking about how much closer to Canada we were to them. And it turns out, no, we're actually 2 hours further away from Canada than DC. They can get to Canada in 7 hours, and it takes us a minimum of 9.
Interesting.
Yeah, the map is sort of, which brings me back to Nova Scotia, which
may we all find our own personal Nova Scotias, wherever that may be.
Yeah. I'm going to push back a little back here on New Orleans, because I've tended to find New Orleans as really sort of a very dirty Las Vegas. Sort of like everything costs a lot of money.
I think it's become more and more there. I will say the last time I was there, it didn't give me a great desire to go back anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
And that's unfortunate. I don't know how much of that was Katrina, or how much of it is just how the French Quarter has been developed. But it's also just from a psychological, human standpoint, one of the most interesting places, because, from the end of this block to the next, you can walk out of a very expensive, several $100 a night hotel room, dressed to the nines to go to a 5-star restaurant. And between here and, the other end of the block, you will pass, a strip club, a music club, 2 or 3 bars selling, 3-for-1s or whatever. You will pass other people dressed to the nines. You will pass conventioneers. You will pass college students, and you will pass the most destitute, dirty, ragged, thin humans you may ever care to see on this continent. And that's just in one block. And then you repeat that exact same sequence the next block and the next block. But I've also found that so many cities, they have different personalities night and day. We even have that in Des Moines. I'm not of the age that I go down to Court Avenue on the weekends, but I hear it's still pretty hopping with a bunch of, early 20-somethings, crowding around the streets. I like to go down there for lunch. It's a very different look and feel at lunchtime than it is, I'm sure, on a Friday night. So every place, tends to have its multiple personalities.
The live cam on the Court and Third has been disappointingly impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, just the amount of people on the corners considering our uptick is sort of amazing.
I saw that on the news, and I was kind of shocked by it, to be honest. But that's the other thing about change. So I mentioned Moab. Here's a great, one of my favorite books. Not because it's necessarily a great book, but because it has my favorite foreword of any book I've ever read. And I will admit, I was once upon a time the person who wouldn't read the the author's foreword or introduction. I just go right to chapter 1. Mm-hmm. But Edward Abbey's Desert Solitaire changed that for me. Edward Abbey, from spent some time in the Moab area as a park ranger. Also famous, wrote the Monkey Wrench Gang and a few other kind of far out there books, fun reads. But his author's introduction to Desert Solitaire is just 3.5 pages of beautiful prose. And he talks, in that final paragraph about how, don't just hop into your car and rush out to the Canyonlands, hoping to see some of what he hoped to evoke in those pages. He goes on to say, well, first off, you can't see anything from a goddamn car. You got to get out of the car and walk, better yet, crawl on, your hands and knees. And maybe when, signs of blood start to, mark your trail, you'll see something. Maybe. Probably not. Things have changed. For better, for worse. And I think that includes most of our cities and our communities as well. I'm getting really deep today. What's up with that, Chris? You bring it out of me.
I know. I want to allow everyone to find their own path. As you talk of Zen and principles a lot, and that's actually when we had our kids, I realized that they don't come with pre-programming, and the fact that I had a belief that I was Catholic was something that was actually externally programmed. And so I spent a lot of time trying to think through how I want to indoctrinate the base principles in my children that I think would be useful. Now, of course, my character can sometimes override some of my best planning. However, I found that with these binary religions, they were created to help us have easy references of this one's good, this one's bad. I can label quickly. The same thing we see in human society in general. I want to know which tribe I'm in. I want to know friend or foe, should I fight or flight? All those things come in there. And then we spend all this time saying, oh no, there's not actually really a human in the clouds that you're going to fly through an accident. We don't have to call God and tell him we're going to run an airplane up his backside, right? It's not really there, and you aren't really going to have the ground open up and you're going to fall into the devil and burn to death. Or depending on your, not temporal, but temperature perspective, you might freeze to death. Depends, if you're Dante or later. So we spend all this time giving them this idea that the world's black and white, binary, 1, 0, on, off. And then we spend our later years when it realizes that they go too far to one side saying, well, it's actually really very gray. And so you need to be able to retranslate God and devil into your internal battle and all this other stuff. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to do it slightly differently, just start with Taoism, because the whole thing is a relativistic path that is of your own making, born out of the realization that when humans interact, there will always be conflict, and you're going to have to identify how you define and interpret the path you're on, which is always a right path for you, but is always constantly changing in the context of these human interactions, where the end goal is a knowledge so deep you have realized you've arrived at no knowledge, where instead of a binary we start with in gray, we start in a gray with a knowledge not to reach a binary. I'm not entirely sure how well it's working. I hope it's doing okay. I know a lot of it is lost on them right now, but it does bring up very interesting conversations, like when they ask, what is God, right? And you have to say, well, that is what many people believe the judge of good and bad is, right? That's, it's interesting to try and flip the things that we believe we know and try to make sure that we fit those things that I was trained through my culture to know, and now explain them to someone because you've given them an alien orientation of when they go to class. We had a kid in my daughter's class whose mother had died and had unfortunately died just before Easter. And he was very positive she was coming back on Monday. And you know, because there's sort of a little bit Jesus talk coming home and those sort of things. And I'm sort of like, where is this coming from? Because it didn't seem, we're in a Montessori school, so it didn't seem like the teachers were really pushing Christianity usually. I mean, you know, Montessori is full of a bunch of hippie heathens, right? So I was sort of like, where is this coming from? And she explained to me a little bit, or well, bits and pieces as much as a 5-year-old explains. And I was able to piece together that this kid was positive that Jesus was bringing back his mom on Monday. And so he could not wait for the weekend. And that stuff is so hard because I don't know how you, I had to try and figure out how to explain to her what is Jesus and where's this coming from? Because we've always told our kids that when you're done, you're done. So you better do this one right, you know? And it's interesting in those how to, you know, reframe people's defaults, because when you have struggle, it's human nature to move back to your default positions, right? I was wondering, you know, if a plane's crashing for someone who's an atheist, how many of them truly do believe in the model of randomness that is resulting in that, and how many were masking that they were given a construct they could never have escaped.
Deep thoughts for a Monday night.
Yeah, not to try and, you know, I'm trying to make you feel better about the fact that we're in you know, having some deep concepts.
I appreciate it. And that's, you know, one of the things that I've always appreciated about you, Chris, is we always have great conversations. And I think my fellow Heimers would probably say the same thing. And so that bring us back to the Oppenheimer. I do have to say and give a shout out to two of my fellow 2017 original class of 20 over 20. Our mutual friend, Joe Vandekeith. Joe, how are you? And also to Aaron Santos, who was also in that original class, who I did not know at the time, but have for the last 3 years had the distinct privilege of working alongside at EMC. So Aaron, if you're watching, shout out to you as well. A fellow 20 over 20.
I mean, I think this Oppenheimer Society so far has been an incredibly innovative, not yet failure, which is good. I mean, every year we have an unconventional shift because we sort of keep forgetting the plan, but we get everything out eventually.
And, you know, what is that failure? What does a failure look like? I mean, who's going to be the person to judge that, right? Because we can just keep clicking along.
That is the beauty of having no objective. I mean, obviously, Lynn Hicks was identifying that, you know, in the changes in newspaper models, it raised the idea that we don't have as good of a revenue model as a 40 under 40, but I'm hoping we never need one.
If you never need one, then you don't have to worry about it. Why complicate things?
One of the big things, though, that was I found interesting your comment on it's 6 degrees of connectivity in Des Moines. I got a LinkedIn invite the other day from someone where we shared something like 246 connections, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think I'd ever met him. Like, and if I had, I completely don't know how I repeatedly met them and never knew them, right? Yeah. I find Des Moines very interesting in some of those resume builder connections, which I think was one of the points of this, is how do we actually just find people who are really wanting to understand more about someone who's just, you know, different, which is in places like Des Moines, where I think we're doing good with our group, but it is hard because we have so many shared connections objectives. What do you think we can do better instead of really sort of 6 degrees of connectivity to more like 6 meaningful relationships with more people to actually know each other better? I mean, we have individuals within this town alone, which isn't a large town, living very completely different lives, right?
And there's so 2 things that I've done, and this is not a solution by any means, but 2 things that I've done for the last couple of years that I'm happy to share. One is on quality, the other one is on quantity of connections. Because sometimes to find those right connections or help them, connect with someone else that they were maybe meant to connect with, sometimes you just need a certain amount of volume, because you're not going to bat 1,000 with every connection you make. But also understanding and appreciating there are still needles in those haystacks. And so in my roles, the hats I wear, I get probably anywhere from 40 to 80 emails, LinkedIn messages, voicemails, Facebook messengers, you name it, for people asking for my time. Hey, Jason, can you just spare 10 minutes? I'm a college student. Can you give me 15 minutes? Or I have a startup company. Can you just give me 15 minutes? If I answered all of those, I would have no way of being able to do anything else. That's a good problem to have, but I also feel like you get to the point where you don't respond to any of them because you don't have time to do, even a fraction of them. But it's kind of the understanding there are some probably needles in those haystacks. So from time to time, I put out a sign up, signup.com, and I'll put out, like anywhere from, 6 to 12, 15-minute meeting spots. And I'll let people sign up. I'll post it on LinkedIn. I'll share it with some people who have asked for time. And I've done that, a handful of times. And it's some of the best hours that I'll spend, to do 3 or 4, 15, 20-minute meetings in an hour, just with the randomness of the people who actually took the time to sign up. And sure, about half of them are trying to sell to me and trying to pitch, and that's fine. I still learn something from them, and I hope to give them something in return. But so many of them have just been people asking for either advice, maybe some mentoring perspectives, or, asking me to help, make some other connection. And so do I need to do that? No, but I find it incredibly rewarding to give an hour here and there just to also see what serendipity kind of brings across my desk. Using a similar tool, I also use SignUp to schedule networking time, because to get to quality, it still takes time. And with so many of us in our circles also being so busy, sometimes we don't make the effort to schedule time, even for that lunch, that coffee, that happy hour, lately the virtual, sessions, because we have so many people. Or we're worried about, intruding. If I don't have something specific I want of them, how dare I, ask for time with them? So I was on a plane ride a couple years ago, making my to-do list, and I started writing names of people that I needed to schedule, lunch, happy hour, coffee with. And without even trying, I was like at 100 names in no time at all. And I'm like, well, no wonder I've fallen behind, is because the thought of scheduling 100 coffees, lunches, whatever, was completely daunting. Especially with the way we too often schedule those things is I send you 5 options, those don't work. You send me 3 options. One of them might work, but then it changes. And it's 12 emails back and forth just to schedule a cup of coffee. And so I've also started using SignUp. I will block off, each month, 2 or 3 spots each week for coffee, lunch, happy hour. And then I'll send that sign up link to a group of people that, maybe we're past due to catch up on. I don't use a CRM tool to keep up with my connections per se, but, I kind of have that running list of, hey, who is it about time that we should catch back up? And at first it seemed a little conceited, I'll admit, hey, sign up to meet with me. I'm so important. But, 99.9% of the people said, Jason, thank you for making it easy. I'd love to catch up with you. I've been wanting to do it as well. But here again, I didn't want to go through the 12 emails just to schedule a cup of coffee. And so they really have appreciated hey, this time slot works for me. Sign up. I send them an invite and we're good to go. So there are some things that even some of the social technology has really helped us have the opportunity to go a little bit deeper in some of those relationships as well, to still have that face-to-face component.
One of the big things you did, EMC, this year, as I understand it, is really helping guide that digital transition. And one of the things that we've been seeing in sort of with Truck, we've been working a lot in the legal space and shifting people who have been used to only that face-to-face to sort of that deliberate serendipity, so to speak. Right? That knowledge of, I want to have serendipity, but I need to be more deliberate in engagement and purposeful in those connections. And it's been sort of surprising in some ways who has jumped into taking that seriously and who hasn't. How did it work for you guys? I mean, obviously the insurance business, by its very nature, is usually a bit leaning towards stable and not always as innovative just by nature of risk management as it could be otherwise. How have you found it trying to facilitate that culture change, or who was facilitating that as much as they could have, and has it worked? What were the biggest takeaways of it so far?
Yeah, so we got about 4 hours. We can do that question.
Well, that would definitely be the first 15-minute one. That would blow the 15-minute target.
Yeah, first thing I would say is when I started at EMC 3 years ago, they had already started to, I called that, they were in Innovation 1.0. I call Innovation 1.0 the chasing the shiny objects. You decide you need to innovate, so you go out and you make an investment, you partner with a startup company, you just start doing things because you don't know where to start. Innovation 2.0 is what I call the processization of innovation. So that's where you hire a leader like myself. You actually start to build a strategy around what are you trying to do with innovation. And you actually, start to come up with a list of what are the problems you're trying to solve for. So that you're not just out there chasing the shiny objects. By even making a list, what are your key strategic issues? Something I borrowed from the U.S. Army War College. Every other year they publish a key strategic issue list. What are your big issues? What are your big problems? And once you put them in a list, then you can start to prioritize them. So now you have a shopping list. And the other part of processization is that, as you mature, you can actually start to build processes around it so that each time you do a proof of concept or a pilot, you're not just, reinventing the wheel. The first time we tried to map out our POC process, we had like 5 or 6 steps. Today it's over 30. That's how far we've matured. We now know where do we go, who do we engage for data, for security, for all those different components. And it also, then by prioritizing that list, it also allows you then to speak to founders, even like yourself, Chris, to say, hey, I really like what you're doing. And I really do. The problem that you can help us solve is currently number 12 on our list of 20. And we're focused on, 1 through 5. So someday we will make more progress and get through that list. And we want to come back and talk to Truck because I think there's a really interesting use case there. But we just can't do it all at once. You know, you've heard the adage, the saying, you know, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we really try to get crisp on. What are we trying to accomplish? The biggest part of that, though, is not just looking at the technology, not just looking at those shiny objects. It's also looking internally to say, what is it really going to take to get things done? And that's where the culture comes in. We have spent at least 50% of our innovation initiatives, resources, energy, trying to foster a culture of innovation in our organization. Because it was that realization that if we don't bring the organization along with us, we're never going to get to that prize. We're never going to get that ROI. We'll never fully adopt if we don't bring the organization along on that journey with us. And what we found is we started to engage more and more of our fellow team members in the process, whether it's evaluating InsurTech, seeing pitches, you know, doing our pop-up innovation labs and some of those things, that our team members were hungry for it. They were eager for it. You know, the very first time that we brought in the GIA companies, the Global Insurance Accelerator, we brought them in to practice their pitches before they, you know, had their culminating event at the symposium. And I just did it as a favor, you know. I'll get you an audience, come in, practice your pitches in front of an audience before you get on the big stage. I just thought it was being nice. I tell you, I had so many people from the audience come up to me afterwards and say, Jason, thank you. I haven't felt this inspired, this engaged, this excited about all this change that's happening in our industry for a long time. You know, I've heard about the disruption. I've heard about all this stuff, and it's been kind of scary. Thank you for engaging us. And so a couple months later, we did our very first Innovation for Breakfast session, where each month we bring people together. I don't provide them breakfast. I don't even feed them. At first, I was accused of doing a bait and switch. But it's kind of based on the whole Drucker principle of, you know, a culture eats strategy for breakfast. So we're going to have innovation for breakfast. We're going to feed everyone. And each month, we bring in InsurTechs, or we bring in pitches, or we'll do updates on some of our own internal innovation initiatives. Sometimes I do fireside chats. Last week, we just had our 25th. We just celebrated our 2-year anniversary of our first Innovation for Breakfast. And so doing things like that, by crowdsourcing, engaging people from across the company into our innovation initiatives, I do believe we've changed the culture. And in fact, I know we have, and it can be a difficult thing to measure. But we do an annual employee engagement survey, like so many big companies do. And one of our engagement questions is, you know, what word or words would you use to describe our company? You know, open-ended. And then they do kind of a word cloud of the results. And for as long as apparently we have been doing that survey, the biggest word in the middle of the cloud has been conservative. Not surprising for a over 100-year-old mutual insurance company in Des Moines, Iowa. But in 2019, last summer, the results came out, and there was a different word in the middle of that cloud. And it was innovative. Now, conservative was still in the cloud, don't get me wrong. And changing and all those things. But the fact that the biggest word in the middle of the word cloud went from conservative to innovative in 1 year told me that we were on the right path, that we were doing the right things, we were engaging our team members, we were bringing the entire company on that journey, which gives me so much more confidence that we'll be able to, you know, reap the rewards of all these engagements that we've been doing in time.
I've got one more shallow question that I think ties a bunch of things as you're mentioning that into place and community and innovation, all those pieces. I look at Des Moines in general, where I think both you and I have chosen to lay down what we believe are long-term roots. And one of the things when you're in Des Moines, obviously, with my social media handles are the other Draper, because in Des Moines, obviously, I got to be very clear. I remember when I first moved back to town, you could tell I was getting invited to some meetings where someone thought they're going to get some free T-shirts, and then they couldn't figure out who this dude in the suit was. I was like, you actually found the wrong one. Sorry about that. I can pass your message on, but thanks for the donuts. It does seem in Des Moines we have always had sort of a conservative leaning culturally. We've had sort of a conservative insular bench, so to speak. When we look at, we have a lot of those individuals with the 249 connections you haven't met has been on like 56 different nonprofit boards, but never jumps to a corporate board, right? You have those individuals who probably participate in every sort of generalized round table. It'll get you some LinkedIn accolade, but isn't in that side where it's in the trenches of we're actually going to change this functional thing. It seems like we have a real hunger for having an identification of our real accomplishments, yet we see a lot of listicles that come out and say, oh, top 10 of this, or top 4 of that, and top 2 of that. And we pay so much money for that right now as a community.
Yeah.
Are there any lessons we can sort of grow out of what you've seen in an EMC, which in many ways is just very much a reflection of a lot of the pieces of Des Moines, I think. I mean, you grew out of Des Moines, it reflects a lot of it. And if you're seeing that ability change that quickly, what can we do you believe, more almost deliberately, serendipitously, as a town, a community, a city, to usher in some of that similar change and perspective we truly do as a community believe in, to build a bench that can actually change it?
So a couple thoughts, and first off, I don't begrudge the people who love to serve on all the boards and do some of that stuff as much for the social interaction as anything else. That's fine.
And I'm not opposed to that, but I read the board package if you're fiduciary.
Yeah, there's a kind of 80-20 rule in so many organizations, including a lot of boards. But I like that you said the word grow. What do we need to do to grow? And maybe this is a good place to wrap up, because whenever I go out and talk about innovation, I often kind of close with the remark that the old question, Chris, when's the best time to plant a tree?
Before you need the shade.
Yeah. So the adage goes 25 years ago. The next best time to plant a tree is today. I've been in Des Moines for 26 years. I've seen a lot of change. I lived in downtown for 7-8 years when my kids were young, up until just a couple of years ago. When I was in my 20s, just moving to Des Moines, I would have loved to have lived in downtown Des Moines. But one, there wasn't much happening because it was still kind of post-flood, and there was no place to live except for the plaza, which I couldn't afford, and a lot of apartments above some of those storefronts that I probably wouldn't want to live in. So I see, we have a long way to go as a community. Yes, we have a lot of things that we need to continue to improve upon, especially in terms of inclusion and equity. We have a long way to go. But I also look at this city and I also appreciate how far we've come. I think that we're now able to have some of the debates and some of the discussions because we've gotten to the point where we are. That we're not worried as much about maybe economic development. It's still important. We're not worried as much about getting on those lists and convincing everyone that it's a great place to live and attracting the cultural and the restaurants and all those other things. We have it all now. But because we do, we now, I think, are poised to have some even more impactful, deeper conversations. Because we're able to stand on the shoulders of some really amazing people that help make this city and this state what it is. But that doesn't mean that all of us can just sit back in the lounge chair and say, hey, let's enjoy all their work. Of course, 2020 is a little different, but if you wanted to go to a different black tie event or music or cultural festival every weekend and then, splice in how many activities in between last year, you could. That's fun. That's a great way to live. You can have a lot of, joy with it, but nothing's permanent. And just like any pump, just like any living thing, this city needs to continue to invest. And so that's up to us. Another one of my favorite adages is, you are somebody. If you ever in your organization, in your company, in your neighborhood, in your city, in your state, in this country, if you think to yourself, you have that little voice that says, man, I wish somebody would do something about that. Why doesn't somebody do that? Why doesn't somebody pick that up? Why doesn't somebody go take that on? Maybe you're the somebody that's supposed to do it. It's up to us, especially we're parents now. We are now at that point where we have as much influence as we're probably ever going to have in our lives, Chris, because of what we've been able to accomplish, because of the networks we've been able to build, because of the things we've been able to do, because we've demonstrated we can get things done. It's now up to you and I and, so many others out there like us to say, if we want to see this community continue and thrive and go in a direction, it's not up to somebody else to do it. It's up to us. So what are we going to do about it?
Well, I've got a long list.
But why does that not surprise me?
Jason, thank you very, very much for joining us. Congrats on going from 20 to Heimer. And hopefully we can all toast to it in person soon.
I will look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.